Hello, and welcome to Console Room Year 11. Thank you for joining us for our examination of robots in Doctor Who panel. We strongly encourage you to check out various other online panels. If you're at the convention itself, feel free to check out various um, other in-person panels and all sorts of other activities. And what I like to do is I like to go around with introductions. So my name is Gordon Dymowski. I am the organizer of the Chicago Doctor Who meetup, and I am also a professional writer and author. And I have an essay in the recently released Outside In Regenerates collection.
Hi, I'm Joe Frazier. This is real. I discovered the Console Room convention last year, and I had K9 with me last year, and that kind of inspired why I'm here tonight. I'm a professional computer programmer and an amateur roboticist. I build robots for fun, so that, and I'm happy to be here.
And I'm Kathryn Sullivan. I write middle grade science fiction and fantasy. I also do essays such as in Children of Time, The Companions of Doctor Who, and also in the same book that Gordon is in, Outside In Regenerates, which I will have in the Artist Alley during the con. Gordon.
Thank you. Well, before we proceed, I want to bring one key point to order. For those of you who are who may be curious, we are not going to be talking about Daleks or Cybermen in this panel. Technically, they are not robots. Daleks have an organic little creature that lives inside it. Cybermen are basically cyborgs, humanoids who have been replaced with cybernetic parts. If that bothers you and you think you really insist that we talk about Cybermen and Daleks, one, you might want to maybe reconsider the life choices that brought you to that decision. The other is I would encourage you to contact Console Room and do a panel next year entitled Cybermen and Daleks Are Robots. No arguments here. But for now, we're going to talk. We're going to talk about the robots of Doctor Who. And we were talking before the panel, and Joe, you had mentioned that you said there were like 3 types of robots.
I kind of view there's 3 types of robots in the world in general too. But so you got your androids. Something that's human shaped. It's got 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. So generally human shaped. So you've got, and we'll be talking about those as we go along. Most of the robots you see in Doctor Who are androids. Then there's the tanks. And now I know we said we weren't talking about the Daleks, but they're kind of like the Daleks. It's a shape. Canines would be what I call a tank. It's a non-human shape on wheels or tracks, might have arms or some kind of weaponry on it. And then there's a third one, which is similar, but its motive devices are different. Spiders. So instead of wheels, they have legs that they move around on. And those are relatively new in Doctor Who. They've only been around since the return of Doctor Who, and most of those are, well, the 2 that will point to later, CGI, easier to do as a CGI than a tank like K9, where it was a remote control thing on wheels. So that's my definition of robots and the types of robots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when you look at the design of robots over the course of the classic series, at least, you see kind of an evolution in how they're designed. So that in the Hartnell years, you have the mechanoids in the chase, and the war machines, where it's basically, it's a guy, it's basically like a Dalek costume. And remember, Daleks are not robots. We're just comparing them to Daleks. We're comparing the costume. It's a guy rolling around on wheels. But when you get to, say, the Tom Baker years, you've got the robots of death, who they're humanoid, but they have a very Art Deco kind of look to them. They're very extravagant because it reflects the fact that they're on this wealthy space miner, and they're people living a life of luxury. And then when you get to the new series, you have robots that are even further defined. So Kerblam is a great example where it's the delivery robot, where it looks very obviously like a robot, but it's very functional. It has a uniform. It looks very functional to design. So there's this nice look about how and it becomes this great exercise in how do you create a mechanical life form, for lack of a better term, but do it in a way where a human being can actually perform it and not necessarily rely on CGI. Like the spiders in End of the World, you need CGI for that. There's no way you can do that mechanically.
Well, getting
Well,
back,
you can't do those mechanically, but for television purposes, it is much easier to do it as a CGI. Yeah.
but getting into the Art Deco, you also had the visitation robot. Well, it was reflected of a society, and it was the pteroleptos that we saw. Yes, they were ex-prisoners. But you could tell they were from a very rich society because that robot was decorated with jewels and colors, and yes, they were using it as a killing machine, but it was probably an
Most of them
original
are.
purpose, more of a servant to them.
Now, the one robot that seems to be the most human, the Movellans, fought the Daleks, but they didn't disguise it. The silver clothes, silver hair, everything else was human actors, but there was a power pack on the back. That's how you could tell they were a robot.
Yeah, and the fact that their thinking was very linear. You basically had these little logic programs that you get upset by doing something very illogical.
Right.
Yeah, and there are robots that I think kind of and also robots don't necessarily happen in a most of the time they happen in a futuristic setting or an alien setting. But like the white robots in The Mind Robber, I think are ones where you wonder where they came from. Like the real reason is that was an episode that was written on they had to do it on the cheap. So they found a bunch of robot suits from another production, painted them white, and put them on there. But I think I'm kind of thinking about with Doctor Who. Has there ever been when you watch it an episode where why are they putting robots here? Like the Mind Robber, I've wondered, but it kind of makes a weird kind of sense. But
You're assuming this came from a story because everything else in that particular pocket universe was from a story, and it just wasn't a story that we had come across. But I mean, it was from futuristic comic strip for the Kraken. Kraken. So you had
we're going to unleash the Kraken tonight.
Yeah.
Well, even if you look at the stills so I've seen the new specials, so no spoilers, but the Celestial Toy Maker, if you look at the stills from back in 1960s, the Celestial Toy Maker had toy robots that were life-size. I don't know if they moved or not. I've only seen the stills. But the robots, mostly they're a servant. Usually they're some kind of killing machine, whether they've been programmed to kill or their programming has been subverted to kill. The early years they were definitely all killing machines. Really until K9, I think most of them were. They were. That's why they were introduced into the story. They were a tool that the main villain used to do their dirty work.
And then you had a completely different shape. And then you had a completely different shape when you got to the nanobots, both in the Empty Child, the Doctor Dances, that was basically supposed to be just a form of ambulance, emergency medical, a technician of some type. And then you also had the nanobots with Smile, working with those little clunky, happy little emo bots.
Emoji bots, yeah.
But having the idea of nanobots that can refigure themselves, that was just they already got the CGI.
Well,
Yeah.
speaking of the emoji bots, it kind of leads me to another question, which is when you look over the course of the series, like to kind of piggyback on Joe's point, a lot of times in the 60s, because there was this big concern about, automation and machines taking over. I mean, the whole supercomputer goes rogue was like a staple of late 60s, early 70s television. And that's where you get the war machines. But do you either of you see, like, maybe throughout the course of the show, how maybe the use of robots reflects an attitude about necessarily the um kind of the attitudes about technology, or kind of, concerns at the time?
Well, I think that the emoji bots were meant to be helpers.
Mm-hmm.
So during in the early years they were killing machines, or in like the robots of death, they were subverted from their main purpose, which was helpers, but they were reprogrammed.
And then we had
Um,
the one that wasn't.
right, right. But so I think that the emoji bots were really meant, and the nanogenes, the nano robots were meant to be helping tools, to help people feel better. I think that's a step in the right direction as far as robots go. Canine was meant to be a canine companion for Professor Marius, who he couldn't bring his dog to space, so he built his own dog.
Mhm.
And then um, so I think that over the years it did the look at robots has changed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because going through, I think it is until we get to the fourth Doctor that we actually get the idea of not all robots are evil. Because
Right.
of course, when you get to Chameleon by the fifth Doctor, yes, it was turned into a weapon by the Master, but most of the time it was just supposed to be something helpful. It was just too bad the inventor died and we couldn't really see the full potential Chameleon used.
Yeah.
Trying to think of any other
It-
ones. Because third Doctor, I don't remember any robots.
Well, the fourth
It's
Doctor, ironically, his first story is called Robot,
Mm-hmm.
right. Yep.
Because that's when we
which
had
is
the
which is pretty
K1.
much pretty much self-explanatory. You
Yep.
don't. The great thing about Doctor Who is that the title automatically spoils the story.
Yeah.
Um,
There were um so Tom Baker obviously had probably the most. Most of those were meant to be. They were pretty much all kind of killing machines up, and then Canine came along and was a helper. An interesting note about Chameleon: he was a true robot. That prop was a true robot. Didn't work very well though, so that's why we didn't see it very much. But
Yeah, 'cause the person who actually built it died and they couldn't use anything else.
right, yep.
mhm.
But really, um, you know, things like the Candyman
Yeah.
was really it was you know it was constructed as the tool to be the killing machine. So um,
And then we get to the Paradise Towers with the cleaning machines,
right, yeah,
which are back to like the war machine type
yeah,
of
the tank
killing
it brought
machines.
the tanks back.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Probably repurposed the design from the war machines.
Yeah.
It's very similar. Change the arms, change
Yeah,
the
yeah. They went into the
way
BBC
moves.
closet and said, "Hey, let's pull this out." I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
on a very side related note, I was flipping through the channels and saw part one of Frontios, and it's the first episode, and they're wearing the Blake Seven Federation helmets. You go, yeah, they got a lot of use out of those props, didn't they?
Oh,
yeah.
and they probably reused it on the third Doctor. Was it Frontier in Space or the Colony in Space, where they had
Yeah, the
the
the IRC robot.
yeah.
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
yeah,
That
that
was
same
another
idea.
tank.
Like
Yeah.
let's
Yep.
masquerade the hands for killing claws. Yes.
The thing you think about those tank robots is they had to be built big enough to have somebody be able to sit in them in some kind of rolling probably a rolling wheelchair, a battery operated wheelchair to move them around. So that's why they were tended to be so big and bulky.
Yeah, and I think when you move from the classic series to the new series, you get a little bit more of a nuanced interpretation of robots. You know, you get the spider robots. You get kind of the kind of robot cleaning thing in the Caretaker with Capaldi, where where it's very much yes, it's moving, and I think it is kind of a little war machine, but there's a great kind of new kind of thinking in terms of design, because when you look at the design in the classic series, it's almost always a guy in a suit. Even if it's a war machine, it's a guy in a big cardboard suit, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas in the new series, it's not just CGI. It's also, I think the Caretaker was a very practical machine. You've got things like the android host of Weakest Link in Bad Wolf.
Yeah, the android.
There were Android, and there were a couple of other ones in that episode.
Yeah.
They were all kind of built along the same lines, kind of a Android, but with more of a tank bottom,
Yeah.
no legs, but arms and a head. So kind of looked human, but
yeah, and I think that's where you see kind of the kind of change in thinking from the classic series, because the classic series was just thinking about, okay, we just need a robot. What do we have? Let's design it. But I think, and you're talking about 1970s, 1980s conceptions of like what is streamlined, what's going to look human, what's going to look mechanical. It's like it's the old saying you hear about Doctor Who, when you try to predict the future, it always looks dated. And I think with the new series, there's much more, because a lot of the future stuff is filmed with like more contemporary fashions. The designs of anything mechanical kind of look a little bit more streamlined and sleek, because it's how we think of design in the 21st century. We want everything kind of a little bit more. It's less about. It's more about aesthetics than anything else.
But then you get the clockwork androids or clockwork robots from The Girl in the Fireplace, which was kind of incorporation of, they're basically taking parts from the humans that they had. Spoilers. But you also had, it's more of a steampunk version of that too by the time we get to Deep Breath, where you had the other, they were supposed to be the evolved clockwork robots from Girl in the Fireplace, and we end up with them in Deep Breath. But they were supposed to be robots too.
Yeah, but there's
Are they
also
cyborgs or robots by that point?
Yeah, but keep in mind those clockwork robots were actually, I think there's supposed to be a tension between the design and how they work, because we don't think of clockwork robots. We think of robots as like transistors, but the fact that they were mechanical, and I think the twist in Deep Breath that they are kind of the extreme version, shall we say, of the clockwork robots. I think there's still that thinking of, seeing someone in 17th century French, costuming, have like a little buzzsaw pop out of their wrist. It's that sleek design, but it's still somehow deadly. And I think with the new series, I think the approach is also, robots, I think, become much more of an everyday kind of thing, of course, that you would obviously have in your household, your spaceship, etc.
Or in your medical center, like the hand bots and The Girl Who Waited.
The thing about, I think that, kind of piggyback on what you're saying, the design change in the robots comes from what the actual people who build robots are doing. I mean, everybody, the original film cinematic robot, or the story, I mean, you go back into the 1800s when the term robot was coined, they were thinking kind of like a humanoid android, but it's really an impractical form for a useful robot. It's easy to tip over. It's really not built for heavy lifting or doing heavy work. It's not built for, the only thing it's really good for is going upstairs. Even the Daleks, they finally figured out that the Daleks, their main weakness was they couldn't go up steps. So to get away from you, just go up to the next floor. Robots like K9, you need a ramp. And so that's where robot designers have figured out that anything with legs can go up the steps. Spiders can crawl up the walls because they've got the legs. The Skovax Blitzer, the one from The Caretaker, had legs so that it could go on any terrain, and that's what they're doing with robots. It's more likely to be if you look at what DARPA is doing with their robot designs, the more practical designs are robots that are built like a dog. It's got 4 legs, doesn't tip over as easy, it can move, it's lower to the ground, so it's got a better center of gravity, and that's showing up as Doctor Who progresses too. They're incorporating what's happening in the real world and what will happen in the future, I think, with robot designs.
That doesn't work at all is the second Doctor's the Dominators. We had the low quarks who needed knees because they couldn't move too well.
Yeah, the quarks and the Chumbleys.
Yeah.
The Chumbleys, yes. Yeah. They were same kind of design, a box with legs and arms. And even the arms on the quarks didn't have elbows. It was a shoulder, it lifted up, it was just a straight kind of thing. But they all had heads.
Yeah,
so
the
their
quarks,
sensory things were there, yeah.
And the funny thing about the quarks is that they had actual children in those things where it's like, I don't know how child labor laws were in the 1960s in Britain, but yeah, I'm sure, because I know you could barely see out of them, and you couldn't even move your arms. You could do that. Basically, you could stick them straight out and back because that's where the quarks guns were.
But the Chumblies, I mean, they were just basically this.
They're basically just like little. I think they were just like little plastic things on like a remote control car because they just they chumbled along.
Yeah.
And that's the only way you can describe them. They kind of.
There's a robot in the Sontaran experiment episode where I want to say that was probably the first non-human controlled, there was no human inside of that robot to make it move. But the design is very impractical. It's way top heavy. It was obviously on wheels. They must have been pulling it along, and it had some kind of, it had the lasso thing. But the design on it was just, Sontarans aren't very good at designing robots, I guess, because it just was very impractical. In a different sort of way than the Chumbleys and the quarks. The mechanoids, the first robot that wasn't an android in Doctor Who, just a big globe that had a sensor array and maybe a weapon on somewhere in the middle of the equator. Yeah. And other than that, I don't know if there were some kind of arm mechanisms or something like that too, but it was just like
pincers, basically.
Yeah.
Well, Terry Nation was trying to get a new thing that he could basically market, and that didn't work.
That one didn't go very far.
Yeah, and I kind of want to pull from a conversation we were having before the panel that, and I think Joe suggested that there were, like the Daleks and Cybermen, that there were robots that kind of straddle the line because like Daleks and Cybermen don't count because there's organic components in them. But I think you said there were others where you could kind of see where they straddle that line.
Where do you put the Autons?
Yeah, the living plastic. Where do you put that?
Is that an organic? Wasn't it supposed to be an organic plastic?
Yeah, it's just basically living plastic of some type.
Well,
yeah. So does it count as a robot?
Or does it come as a life form?
Yeah. Well,
And
because,
another example would be the doppelgangers from the 11th Doctor show, the Rebel Flesh,
Mm-hmm.
where they duplicate the person into a goo into a body that
Mm-hmm.
looks like the person, but it's still controlled remotely by the person in a couch. So I would count that as a robot because it's remotely controlled, or it was remotely controlled, or that was the idea. What it's made out of,
Yeah.
it's doesn't have its own. There's not a being inside of it, or until they develop their own being somehow.
Yeah. And then
But
just like with the Emobot, uh, they basically are by the end of the episode, they're recognized as a life form, as a sentient life form. So it's more of these were slaves in some way, and by the end of the episodes, the doctor is actually convinced people to treat them as sentient beings.
it,
But
and,
it's an
and that
interesting
kind of reflects
evolution.
what we're going through as a society right now with the development of AI,
Mhm.
chatbot, and other artificial intelligences. Back in the war machines were created and programmed by uh,
Done.
Wotan. Sure, Wotan would that it was a computer back in those days. We would look at that as an artificial intelligence today. Um, and so robots their developing their own sentience, their own intelligence would be the next step in, I guess, robot evolution.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah. Well, I'm going to disagree about the Autons and the doppelgangers from the Matt Smith
okay.
episode, because with the Autons, I think that both Spearhead and Terror of the Autons kind of suggest that the Nestines don't so much. For me, when I think of robots, I think of technology, and I think of something that is based on something man-made, but also something that is based on machines. With the Nestine, they tend to use plastic and give it organic qualities. At least that's the way I see it. And
Mhm.
they also will infiltrate and make sure that the plastics that they put out are kind of conducive to their lifestyle. Um, Now, how they get the little guns in the hands, I think that might be well beyond the scope of this panel. Although I will suggest how do those guns work? You know, and then you have to argue, well, if that's the case, when Rory becomes an Auton, is he a robot or is he just a human soul in plastic? And it's again way beyond the scope of this panel. Um, but I also think with the doppelgangers, it's the rebel flesh and the also people, um, because they're in this goo and they're basically duplicates of others. With maybe the only technology is the thing that is a device that makes them look like the people they're working with. I wonder if those can really be called robots because there's not only no mechanical thing, they're not really the fact that they have sentience and the fact that the doctor considers them sentient. Um, you could say that they're, duplicates, maybe they're redundant. And I think that's part of the plot of the episode. But I wonder if you can really call them robots or are they just like very advanced form of clones?
Or nanobots.
Mhm.
Yeah. If you put them in the same class.
Yeah, because even nanobots, you could argue, are a form of technology. They're a form of
Yep.
technology that is very small, and maybe we
Mhm.
don't know how it works, but you can make that argument.
The gangers, the doppelgangers, I think they somehow developed sentience, like we were talking about, some sort of artificial intelligence,
Hmm.
and they became self-aware. And at that point, I don't think they are a robot anymore.
Mhm.
Whether they're, whether they are whether they started out as a robot, by the end of that episode, they weren't robots anymore. So I think that, and the nesting, the autons, I don't know where to put
Alien
them.
life form.
Yeah,
It's an alien. I think you're right. I think it's an alien life form controlling a body of some sort, kind of like a cyborg. It's the Dalek controlling a tank. The Cybermen connected to a metal shell. So I would go. I would agree with that. The autons don't necessarily count as robots.
And speaking of things that may not count as other things, do we want to make a sharp distinction between androids and robots? I know, Joe, you said that androids were a type of robot, and I know
So-
androids have figured prominently, but yeah, it's just putting out there to drive conversation, and hopefully,
I would say that no, an android is a form of robot, just like canine is a form of robot. It's just actually it's funny. I came across in reference to the Movellans that we talked about earlier. They're actually referred to as, if I pronounce this right, gynoids. So you got your androids and you got your gynoids. The difference being that androids would be in the shape of males, and the gynoids would be in the shape of women. So,
But they have both male and female represented there. So it's like,
so the stills that they show are always the women in the tight costume with the long hair. So, but it's still a robot because it's an artificial intelligence. I would say an artificial intelligence is just another form of robotics, just because it's ones and zeros or whatever base number the programmer is using. So if you're using the logic, the steps, the ones and zeros to control the body, the shape, it's a robot. So that's my thinking. Amazingly, the Daleks have been known to build their own robots. Over the course of the years, they've made a number of robots. The first robot was built by the Daleks in the Chase. And I as far as I can tell, it's the first robot that appeared in Doctor Who, and it was William Hartnell. They made a robot, so it would have been an android. It was supposedly built to look like the first Doctor, and so it was William Hartnell fighting a guy that was dressed up like William Hartnell in that episode. And then they quickly got rid of that and went to the mechanoids, and we got our first look at what all the people back in those days would have thought of as a robot, as opposed to, if you look at the robots that were in TV back in those days, mostly they were the Forbidden Planet robot. And I always confuse that robot with the robot from Lost in Space.
Well, they were designed by the same guy.
Right. So they were very similar look. They had the same kind of arms, kind of legs, same shaped head kind of thing. So even those robots, they look like robots because they didn't look like people. But I think that even if something looks like people, like a Movellan or the Doctor robot, or Bracewell in the Victory of the Daleks, it looks like a person, but it's still programmed, and whether it knows it's a person or not, or a robot or not, that was the problem Bracewell had. He didn't know he was a robot, but he was programmed to act like a human. So I would argue that they're still robots.
Are there any kind of, I guess the question I want to ask is, I know in all the history of Doctor Who, are there any robot characters, or types of robot that you think are very underrated, that really need a little bit more love? like for me, the ones that I'm thinking of,
Mhm.
I think they're the Gundam from Warrior's Gate. They're the suits of armor with like I think it's like
Oh,
it looks
yeah.
like a Japanese samurai helmet, and they
Mhm.
go in because even though they're old, I think there's something about the idea that someone didn't put these robots in like traditional flat metal, but they gave them an element of like it's not just the mechanics, it's like because they're armor, it just has a I like the idea of technology, you know, newer technology within older technology.
Well, I would love to have seen more of if they could have gotten Chameleon to work. That would have been something that would have been cool. But really, that robot was only going to sit there and talk. As far as robots that they could have done more with over the years, as companions, I don't know. I kind of they would need to be a robot like Canine. And Canine is come and gone, and he's gone through so many iterations. He came back with Sarah Jane. Um, they had another spin-off series. It was like Canine and Company or
Yeah.
something like
In
that. And then there
Australia,
was
where you could
they
fly
redesigned
over.
him to fly.
Yeah, you
Oh, I
can.
hated that design. That's just I mean, this is Canine,
Yeah.
Mhm.
rolling
And
around on wheels. But
and if anyone watching is really tempted and feels the need to watch the 2010 Australian K9 series with that design, it is available for free on Tubi. I am not
oh,
passing
there you
any
go.
judgment if you watch it. I'm just saying it's out there. I'm just saying it's out there.
I have seen a couple episodes, and like I said, the design, you know, how to, I think with as far as fleshing something out and making it a regular, um, the emoji bots just didn't. I don't think they can do much. The doppelgangers would be one that they could do more with, I think. But they're like you say, we're not sure that they're really robots anymore. They've developed their own sentience with some kind of living flesh that they have. The More recently, I don't know, the robo forms are mostly a tool.
Yeah.
They could
Although
make
they do have different makeup.
right. Yes,
Santa
they change their
versus
costumes. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
I'm quite sure there are quite a few people out there who want to see more battles with the rest on Warrior Robot from the Five
Yeah,
Doctors.
that would be one, and it's very easy to do, especially
yeah.
now because you don't even have to worry about spending any money on CGI.
lot less expensive to do it that way with the costume instead of the CGI.
Yeah.
Um,
The failed
it's
robot, the one in Trial of the Time Lord, we had the black light one, with a huge
Mysterious
head.
the mysterious planet, that
Yeah.
one with like the fork head,
Yeah,
so to speak.
that didn't
oh
make
yeah.
sense.
Um, I think the thing about a robot, and I think they were trying to develop this with Chameleon and with Canine to try to give it a personality and something that would be a companion. And it's something that uh, most it has to be something that's not a killer, that's a helper, something that has its own sentience. It's or an intelligence so programming so smart that you can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
But most of the robots are just tools, killing machines. And if they could come up with a character, the robot companions have been done in other shows. Going back, there's a TV show, a buddy cop show where
Holmes and Yo-Yo.
Yeah.
Holmes and Yo-Yo.
Mhm.
Yo-Yo being the robot, it obviously it looked like a human. So it's one of those things where to show that it's a robot, you open up a chest plate or you take the face off and you can see but put that back on, you're back to the makeup, the human being. I think a character could be developed that way.
Mhm.
Doing something, programming a robot to be a companion, that something like a Turlo, where the doctor doesn't know it's a robot, can't tell it's a robot until it's too late, kind of thing.
Like the Android Invasion, but that wasn't a very pleasant robot that was following the doctor around.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, the face falls off to Sarah Jane. It's like, yeah, okay.
Excuse me.
But I mean, we already had a helpful robot in Robots of Death, because you had the dumb robot who's basically the companion of the cop who was frightened to be undercover. And that was a very sympathetic character.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Now that's a character that could come back.
Mhm.
I would like to see that.
Yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
this, the doctor can meet up with characters all the time. The new specials are bringing back characters from the classic series. Nothing to say a robot, the dumb robot that could talk, could come back. I think he'd make a great companion.
Yeah, even if all he says is, please do not throw hands at me.
So, the we were talking about some of the robots that in the recent years, and what some of the ideas that one of the ideas that's come up a lot in Doctor Who all the way through the years is the robot in the knight's armor. I mean, that first showed up back in Tom Baker's day. It showed up in I think John Pertwee might have had some robots. And then all the way up to Peter Capaldi's robot, the Robots of Sherwood, a robot dressed up like a knight in armor. And I'm guessing, the prop department's got plenty of suits of armor sitting around, so we can make that into a robot. We don't have to pay the actor as much.
Yeah, BBC, I think, pretty much has, I think they've got like different closets for like different time periods. So it's like, if you want ancient Rome, you go, here's your I Claudius wing, here's your Robin Hood wing, here's your Victorian England wing. There's maybe like a small closet for the Western stuff, which explains the gunfighters. And so, yeah, and I think too, one of the great things, and I kind of want to start, we start kind of bring it to a close, but I think one of the great things about Doctor Who is it never treated robots like most science fiction shows, at least American science fiction shows, are like, let's throw a robot in it to make it futuristic. Let's throw a robot in it to make it high tech. I mean, even Columbo threw in Robbie the robot in one of the later episodes. The Sky High IQ Muter case available on Tubi. So for you watching out there, go watch. After you finish this, go watch. Come back. We'll still be here. And I think with Doctor Who, I think it's safe to say one of the great things about it is that robots were never just set dressing. They were always somehow integrated in the plot, even if it's not just in something obvious like Robot or Robots of Death, but even in something like The Chase. It was meant to be the mechanoids are on a planet, the Daleks are coming in, they blast each other away. Any thoughts about like how we think robots have been used in both new and classic Who?
Well, it also depends on the science fiction of the time period, because a lot of times we came out of the Cold War where robots were always the evil ones. And now we're running into, my favorite short fiction lately has been Murderbot, where you have a robot who basically is being thought of as a murder machine, and all it wants to do is sit back and watch the soap operas. I like this idea. So we're getting more sympathetic characters in science fiction and fantasy, which is also getting into Doctor Who.
I think you're right.
Well?
In the early years, in the classic series, robots were definitely the tool, the killing machine. They weren't even something that were a tool to help work. The colony in space, that was meant to be a working robot,
Yeah.
but it got subverted by the programming. The programming gets subverted, so it gets turned into a killing machine. Up until K9, I don't think you get a robot that's not a killing machine or turned into a killing machine at some point. And it took a while. I think it's taken a while to see robots as something. And the Kerblam Man, it's a robot. It's supposed to be doing something, but it got turned into, well, it was meant to be the symbol of technology replacing humans. So not only is it it was kind of a double metaphor there. It was kind of replacing humans by taking their jobs, and then it was killing the humans to show that robots are evil. The robots weren't really evil. It was the programmer that's evil. It's not the tool that does the evilness. It's the person that programs the tool, the robot. K9 got programmed.
That's been happening all along, because even in Tom Baker's robot, the original robot was supposed to be there for help. And again, it gets subverted.
It's supposed to be doing things that human beings can't do, and then it got reprogrammed by the bad guys. You know.
Okay, we're coming up towards the end of the panel, so I'd like to turn to our panelists once again with any final thoughts, conclusions, observations.
Seems like the weakest link is always the humans who are programming it. So yeah, until they can do something about that.
It always comes down to the humans and how they use the tools, the robots that they have. You know, K9 can be definitely used for good. He always was used for good, even though he was a bit of a smart aleck. But unfortunately, the bad people, the bad guys, the villains have a tendency to reprogram their robots to do the wrong thing.
Yeah, and I think too, I think that's one of the key themes within Doctor Who. The robots are never inherently evil, except maybe the war machines. It's always the people who are behind it who are the ones using them for nefarious purposes. Okay.
I mean, even the girl in the fireplace, the robots there were originally helpful. It's just that they kind of got their coding mixed up on their own.
Right.
So it's garbage in, garbage out.
Good summary.
The robots are only as smart as the person that programs them.
Okay, well, I think on that note, I think we'll end. I want to thank Kathy and Joe for participating. And I want to thank you who are watching on YouTube for joining us. Please be sure to enjoy the rest of Console Room Year 11. If you're actually at the convention, check out all the great things and panels going on there. If you're joining us virtually, there's going to be there's going to be a ton of other virtual panels. And if you're at the convention, be sure to buy, as Kathy did so quickly, buy Outside and Regenerates. So, and so again, thank you very much for joining us at Console Room. This has been the examination of robots in Doctor Who, and have a great rest of the convention. Bye all.